In medieval China, salt was more than a seasoning, it was a weapon of power. The state monopolized it, and peasants could barely afford a handful. Yet winter was long, and meat meant survival. Without salt, they turned to wind, smoke, tea, and even earth itself. From the frozen plains of the north to the misty hills of the south, the Chinese discovered ways to preserve flesh with nothing but nature, transforming necessity into quiet genius and hunger into heritage. In medieval China, salt was not a simple kitchen staple. It was a form of power, a source of tax, and sometimes even a cause of rebellion. From the Han to the Song dynasties, the imperial government maintained a strict monopoly over the production and sale of salt. Peasants, hunters, and soldiers had to pay high prices or rely on illegal traders to obtain even small amounts. For the poor, salt was as precious as silver. Yet meat, once slaughtered, could not wait. In an age without refrigeration, every cut of pork, beef, or mutton was a race against decay. For many rural families, livestock was slaughtered only once or twice a year, often before the harsh winter, or when an animal grew too old to work. Losing that meat to rot meant losing an entire season's supply of protein. Unable to afford enough salt for curing, people turned to the environment itself for help. They studied the rhythm of wind, temperature, and humidity, learning how the world could be an ally in preservation. What began as desperation became innovation, a quiet science born in farmyards and mountain villages. Through patience, observation, and necessity, they discovered ways to keep meat edible for months, sometimes without a single grain of salt. In the dry, frigid winters of northern China, nature offered the perfect tool, the wind. Peasants would slice meat into thin strips or long pieces, hang them on bamboo poles, and leave them outside to face the northern air. This process, called fenggan ru, wind-dried meat, required no salt, no smoke, only time and the discipline to wait. The sub-zero air naturally dehydrated the meat, halting bacterial growth and sealing in flavour. Families watched the hanging rows sway gently in the breeze like red banners against a pale sky. Within days, the meat turned firm, aromatic, and safe to eat. When boiled or stir-fried, it regained tenderness, carrying a faint sweetness from the cold. In ancient villages, the sight of wind-dried meat signalled the coming of winter festivals. It was more than food. It was reassurance that the family would not starve. For northern China, wind was not an enemy of life, but its quiet protector. In the mountainous regions of China, where the air was damp and the cold crept into every wall, people turned to smoke and fire. Instead of relying on salt, they learned that smoke itself could preserve. Villagers hung strips of meat above the kitchen hearth, often the heart of the home, where slow-burning wood provided both warmth and protection. The rising smoke carried resins and oils that coated the meat, sealing it against mold and insects. Different woods produced different flavours. Pine gave a sharp, almost medicinal scent. Bamboo offered a sweet note. Dried tea leaves released a complex aroma that lingered in the air. For days, sometimes weeks, the meat darkened from pale pink to deep brown. It became both dried and infused with flavour, tough enough to last for months but tender when cooked again. This was the birth of larou, the ancient Chinese smoked meat. It was not just a survival method but a ritual. Each family had its own blend of woods, its own rhythm of fire and patience. Even centuries later this tradition endured, a smoky memory of winters past, where the scent of preservation was also the scent of home. In the humid southern provinces, where rain fell for weeks and meat spoiled quickly, the poor relied on what they had: tea, ash, and earth. Used tea leaves were dried, crushed, and layered over meat to absorb moisture. Tea contained tannins and antioxidants, acting as a natural antiseptic. Wrapped tightly, the meat could stay fresh for days longer than usual. Others took a more inventive approach, burying meat in cool ashes from the stove or encasing it in dry clay. These materials created an airless seal that slowed decomposition. When unearthed, the meat retained its shape and mild aroma, ready to be cooked or boiled. Such methods were humble yet ingenious. They reflected the wisdom of people who understood that preservation was not about wealth, but about harmony with nature. Even without salt, the Chinese found protection in the simplest elements: smoke, tea, and earth. When salt was scarce, flavour itself became the guardian of food. In wealthier households or among merchants, meat was soaked in rice, wine, vinegar, or early forms of soy sauce. These liquids created an acidic or alcoholic barrier that stopped bacteria from spreading while transforming the taste entirely. Rice wine, with its gentle sweetness, softened the fibres of pork and duck. Vinegar added sharpness, slowing decay while giving the meat a tang that awakened the appetite. Soy sauce, thick, dark and complex in the medieval period, wrapped every piece in a natural glaze of umami and mild saltiness. Together, these ingredients did more than preserve. They elevated meat into something closer to art. The longer it rested, the deeper its colour and aroma became, like aged wood or fermented tea. What began as necessity turned into a culinary philosophy. That time could be an ingredient, not an enemy. For the cooks of ancient China, this was a form of respect, not just for the animal, but for the fleeting nature of life itself. Preservation was patience, and patience was virtue. In many rural villages, two worlds, sun and smoke, worked together. During the short dry days of autumn, families would lay bamboo racks high above the ground to dry meat under the gentle sun. The heat removed moisture quickly, while the altitude kept away dogs, flies, and dust. When night came and the air grew damp, the same meat was brought indoors and hung above smouldering wood. The alternating rhythm of sunlight and smoke hardened the surface while locking in scent. Over several days the meat changed colour, from pale to golden brown, then to a deep mahogany. This cycle mirrored the balance of yin and yang, light and shadow, heat and coolness. It was both science and spirituality in motion. The final product carried the warmth of the sun and the whisper of wood smoke, a taste that belonged to the turning of seasons. To travellers passing through those villages, lines of drying meat shimmering in morning mist were a symbol of survival and community, proof that the people knew how to live with nature, not against it. In Sichuan and other humid regions, people discovered a method that seemed almost magical: fermentation. Instead of fighting decay, they guided it. Pieces of meat were mixed with rice, garlic, and a little rice wine, then sealed inside clay jars. Over days and weeks, natural bacteria transformed the mixture, producing a mild, sour aroma that kept harmful microbes away. This process, later known as Junyang Ru or wine-cured meat, was an early form of microbial preservation. The rice absorbed the juices, while yeast from the air and grain converted sugars into alcohol and acid. The result was meat that could last for months, and, when cooked, revealed a deep, complex flavour, slightly tangy, faintly sweet, and incredibly tender. To modern science, this was the earliest evidence of spontaneous fermentation used intentionally for food safety. But to the villagers who practiced it was simple intuition, a quiet understanding passed from mothers to daughters, from hearth to hearth. Fermented meat represented more than sustenance. It was wisdom embodied in a pot. In every sealed jar there was a belief that life could continue through transformation, that what changes does not die, but endures. Over centuries, these methods of preservation evolved from survival tactics into culinary heritage. Smoked meat became la roux, a delicacy of New Year feasts in Hunan and Guizhou. Fermented meat inspired countless regional variations, each with its own aroma, texture, and legend. In southern mountains, families shared tea meat, while in the north, fungan roux became a winter tradition. The boundary between preservation and cuisine disappeared. What once kept hunger away now brought families together. Recipes were refined, rituals formed, hanging meat during winter became a sign of prosperity and care. Travellers from distant lands marvelled at these flavours, noting that Chinese dried or smoked meats carried not just taste but memory, of patience, labour and season. Even the poorest farmer's home might hold a string of cured pork, glistening in the soft smoke like a small treasure. Through centuries, these practices proved that necessity could birth art, and that scarcity often gives rise to the deepest creativity. What began as a struggle against spoilage became one of China's most enduring gifts to its culinary world, the transformation of preservation into culture. Behind every preserved piece of meat lay a moral lesson. In Confucian thought, to waste food was to disrespect both heaven and one's ancestors. Every grain, every cut of meat symbolized the labor of countless hands: the farmer, the butcher, the cook, the firekeeper. Preserving it was not only practical but sacred. In families across dynasties, teaching children to value food became part of moral education. A household that let food rot was seen as careless, even unfilial. To keep meat through the long winter, to protect it from mold and time, was a form of virtue, a testament to foresight and gratitude. These ideas shaped not only survival, but also character. Diligence, patience, and restraint were virtues intertwined with preservation. The process itself required attention, adjusting fire, watching the weather, knowing when to turn or hang the meat. It was a ritual of awareness, reminding people that life and sustenance were fragile gifts. Thus, the art of keeping food mirrored the art of keeping harmony between man and nature, hunger and plenty, present and future. Through it, people learned that wisdom was not found in abundance, but in respect for what was already in hand. Without salt there was wind. Without cold storage there was patience. Medieval Chinese people transformed their surroundings into an extension of their own ingenuity. They found allies in smoke, sunlight, and soil, each element lending its quiet strength to protect life. These methods were more than culinary tricks. They were reflections of endurance and humility. To preserve meat was to preserve hope. To believe that what was earned with labour could last beyond a single day. Each strand of dried pork or smoked duck hanging in the winter air told a silent story, of families preparing for hardship, of generations passing down knowledge without words. It was survival wrapped in grace, hardship softened by creativity. In a world ruled by emperors and taxes, the poor found freedom not in wealth but in wisdom, the wisdom to make nature work for them. And so, through smoke, wind, and time, they preserved not just food, but faith in tomorrow, proof that even without salt life could still endure beautifully.